I learned the limit of a wife's sacrifice trapped inside my crushed car on a freezing Chicago night. Bleeding. I watched the woman who hit me call her boyfriend. The man who arrived to comfort her was my husband of 5 years. The man who strictly forbade me from calling his office. He walked right past my mangled wreckage. Never judge a woman's patience. When despair hits rock bottom, her revenge becomes a flawless, ruthless performance. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for being such a wonderful and supportive community. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to continue operating, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and move our operations over to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story and want to support us, please consider joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to even better, longer, and incredibly detailed exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story, where you will meet a woman named Julia Hunt. The snow was falling in thick, blinding sheets as I drove through the empty streets of downtown Chicago. I had just picked up some specialized hardware components for a personal tech project I had been quietly dreaming about. I eased my foot onto the brake pedal, bringing my modest sedan to a complete and cautious stop at the red light. I always followed the rules. I stopped exactly where I was supposed to, just as I had spent the last 5 years strictly obeying the absolute law laid down by my husband. Victor Vance. Victor was a high-stakes crisis manager for the ultra-wealthy, a man who erased scandals for billionaires and politicians. His one unbreakable rule for our marriage was simple: never, under any circumstances, call his phone during work hours, and I never did. The traffic light turned green. I accelerated slowly, respecting the icy roads. Suddenly, a blinding flash of headlights tore through the blizzard from my left. I did not even have time to scream. A silver Porsche, traveling at a terrifying speed, lost control and slammed violently into the driver's side of my car. The sound of metal crushing metal was deafening, a sickening crunch that echoed deep in my bones. My vehicle was shoved brutally across the asphalt, slamming hard against the concrete median. The world spun in a chaotic blur of shattered glass and deploying airbags. When the violent motion finally stopped, the silence was heavier than the crash itself. I tried to move, but a white-hot agony shot through my right leg. The dashboard had caved in, pinning my shin completely. Shards of the driver's side window were embedded deep in my left arm, and I could feel warm blood pouring down my skin, soaking the fabric of my dress, dropping steadily onto the floor mats. The freezing wind howled through the broken window, biting into my open wounds. I was struggling to breathe, the metallic taste of blood pooling in my mouth. My vision blurred as I fumbled with my right hand, desperately searching for my phone in the wreckage. I found it wedged near the passenger seat. My trembling, blood-stained thumb scrolled to Victor's name. He was my husband. I was bleeding out in a blizzard, but as my finger hovered over the call button, 5 years of deep-seated conditioning paralyzed me. I could hear his cold, authoritative voice in my head, reminding me how crucial his time was, how millions of dollars depended on his undivided attention, even on the razor edge of life and death. The fear of inconveniencing him overpowered my survival instinct. I let my hand fall, dropping the phone onto the icy floorboard. I could not be a nuisance. Through the distorted, cracked windshield, I saw the door of the silver Porsche swing open. A woman stepped out onto the snowy pavement. She was wearing a stunning designer gown and towering heels. It was Savannah Sterling, a notoriously arrogant tech CEO who frequently graced the covers of business magazines. Miraculously, she did not have a single scratch on her. She did not stumble toward my ruined car to check if I was alive. She did not dial emergency services. Instead, she casually leaned against the pristine side of her luxury vehicle, pulled out her phone, and made a call. I could hear her voice carrying over the howling wind, whining and petulant. "I messed up," she complained into the receiver. "Come get me. Deal with this." Exactly 10 minutes later, a sleek black luxury SUV tore through the intersection, ignoring the slick roads, and skidded to a halt just behind the Porsche. The heavy door swung open. My heart stopped completely, utterly forgetting the physical agony in my crushed leg. The man who stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his tailored suit collar against the bitter wind, was Victor, my husband. The man I was too terrified to call for a medical emergency was standing right there in the storm. I opened my mouth to scream his name, but the sound died in my throat. Victor did not even glance at the crumpled mass of steel that used to be my car. He did not look at the flashing hazard lights or the blood dripping onto the snow less than 30 feet away from him. His eyes were entirely fixed on Savannah. He walked briskly toward her, his face etched with a frantic, tender worry I had never seen in our 5 years of marriage. He took off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it snugly around Savannah's shoulders, pulling her intimately against his chest. He was checking her face, smoothing her hair, whispering words of comfort. He then gestured for his assistant, who had stepped out of the passenger side, leaving him behind to deal with the police and the mess she had made. Victor wrapped his arm around Savannah's waist, guiding her gently into the warmth of his SUV. The doors shut heavily, the engine revved. He drove away, leaving his loyal, obedient wife bleeding to death in a pile of crushed metal, entirely invisible in the shadow of his ruthless priorities. The hydraulic rescue tools tore through the twisted metal of my car with a mechanical scream. The deafening sound of the jaws of life snapping the door off its hinges was the only thing anchoring me to reality. At the hospital, the sterile lights of the emergency room glared down at me. An exhausted doctor stood at the foot of my bed, reviewing my scans. "You have a severely fractured fibula and extensive ligament damage," he stated flatly. They handed me a heavy plastic clipboard. With a shaking, blood-stained hand, I signed my own consent forms for the emergency reconstructive surgery. There was no one to hold my hand, no one to consult. As the nurses wheeled me toward the operating theater, I checked my phone one last time. 0 missed calls, 0 messages. My husband was entirely absent from my suffering. 2 days later, I was discharged into the unforgiving winter morning. I navigated the icy sidewalks on aluminum crutches, every step a sharp reminder of the wreck, and hailed a taxi back to our sprawling downtown penthouse. The apartment was immaculate, silent, and bitterly cold. The air felt dead. A quick check of his meticulously kept leather-bound planner and the untouched espresso machine confirmed he had not been home for 48 hours. His executive assistant had sent a brief, automated email to my account stating Victor was managing an urgent media crisis for a high-profile tech client. I knew exactly who the client was. The tears I expected to fall never came. The devastating grief had burned itself out in the hospital bed. Instead, a chilling, methodical clarity washed over my mind. I limped into his private home office, a room I usually avoided out of respect for his boundaries. Victor was arrogant enough to believe his standard corporate security protocols were impenetrable. He forgot exactly who he had married. Before I became a dutiful, invisible corporate wife, I was a top-tier network architect. I sat in his leather chair and booted up his desktop. It took me less than 15 minutes to bypass the biometric locks on his private server, routing through a proxy I had quietly installed years ago just in case, and decrypt his hidden legal files. I was initially looking for evidence of an affair, perhaps hotel receipts or flight logs. What I found was infinitely worse. I opened a secure folder labeled with Savannah Sterling's company name. Inside were dozens of legal drafts, forged email chains, and aggressive litigation strategies outlined in Victor's own meticulous handwriting. Victor was not just doing media damage control for her reckless driving. He was spearheading a vicious, illegal corporate raid. They were actively colluding to steal a revolutionary, unreleased cybersecurity patent. I read the name of the original patent holder, and the air violently left my lungs. Elias Thorne. Elias was my former university professor, my mentor, the man who had paid my tuition out of his own pocket when I had absolutely nothing. Victor was utilizing fabricated evidence, bribery, and dirty legal loopholes to completely bankrupt Elias and hand his entire life's work over to Savannah on a silver platter. My husband was not merely cheating on me, he was financially executing the only father figure I had ever known, all to impress his mistress. That was the exact moment the fragile illusion of my marriage shattered into irreversible dust. I did not scream. I did not throw his expensive scotch at the wall. I sat at his heavy mahogany desk and calmly opened a blank document. I drafted a comprehensive divorce petition, citing irreconcilable differences, deliberately waiving all rights to his vast wealth, his properties, and his investments. I printed it out, signed it with a steady, unyielding hand, and placed it perfectly in the center of the dark wood desk, next to the crisp white paper. I laid my heavy, flawless diamond wedding band and every single black premium credit card bearing his surname. I walked into the master bedroom and pulled a single, small carry-on suitcase from the back of the closet. I bypassed the racks of designer dresses, the silk scarves, and the expensive jewelry he had bought me as apologies for his long hours. Instead, I packed comfortable, practical clothes, and most importantly, 3 encrypted solid-state drives hidden securely beneath the floorboards under my old desk. They contained every line of code, every complex algorithm, and every security architecture I had written before I sacrificed my brilliant career to manage his life. I spent the next 3 hours systematically scrubbing my digital footprint from the Penthouse network. I deleted my user profiles, cleared the local security camera footage, and wiped my personal servers entirely clean. I became a ghost in my own home. By the time the antique grandfather clock in the hallway struck 5 in the morning, long before the sun even thought about rising over the Chicago skyline, I dragged my suitcase to the private elevator. I stepped inside, the steel doors sliding shut on 5 years of blind devotion, and I did not look back, even once. It took exactly 1 week for Victor to finally return to the penthouse. I knew this because I had set up a silent alert on the digital lock before I left, a lingering habit of a paranoid security architect. When he saw the divorce papers, the wedding ring, and the stack of credit cards sitting on his desk, his reaction was entirely predictable. Through a hidden audio bug I had left behind, I listened to him smash a crystal glass against the wall in a brief fit of rage, but the anger quickly dissolved into arrogant dismissal. He scoffed, telling his assistant over the phone not to bother looking for me. He actually laughed, loudly and cruelly, stating that a dependent housewife who had not earned a paycheck in 5 years would come crawling back the moment her meager savings ran out. He believed I was throwing a desperate tantrum. He believed his money was my oxygen. While he was busy underestimating me, I was crossing state lines, driving relentlessly toward Massachusetts to find Elias Thorne. I needed to warn him about the forged documents, to tell him what my husband and that woman were planning. But the brutal reality of corporate warfare moves faster than a speeding car on an icy highway. I was far too late. By the time I reached Elias's small suburban home, the damage was already done. Victor had executed his strike with lethal precision. He had leaked the fabricated evidence to the press and the federal court simultaneously. The morning news networks were already tearing Elias apart, painting the brilliant, honorable man as a fraudulent thief who had stolen his security algorithms from Savannah's company. The court had frozen all of Elias's assets, essentially stripping him of his life's work, his company, and his spotless reputation in a matter of 48 hours. The sheer injustice and the public humiliation were too much for a 70-year-old man to bear. I found Elias at the local county hospital. He had suffered a massive, catastrophic stroke brought on by the immense stress of the indictment. I stood by his sterile hospital bed, staring at the rhythmic rise and fall of the ventilator. The man who had once taught me how to break complex codes, the man who had bought me warm meals when I was a starving student, was now reduced to a fragile shell tangled in wires. That night, as the monitor flatlined and the long, sharp tone pierced the quiet room, a fundamental part of me died alongside him. I held his cooling hand and felt the last remaining traces of my weakness, my fear, and my desperate need for a husband's love wither away. I buried the submissive, terrified woman in that hospital room. What rose from the ashes was something entirely different, something forged in pure, icy rage. The funeral was a small, somber affair under a bleak gray sky. Only a handful of former students and loyal colleagues braved the media storm to pay their respects. I stood near the back, dressed in a sharp black suit, leaning heavily on a sleek black cane to support my healing leg. The air was thick with quiet mourning until a gleaming black limousine rolled onto the cemetery gravel. My blood turned to absolute ice. Victor stepped out, adjusting his expensive tie, playing the role of the benevolent gentleman, and clinging to his arm, wearing a designer black dress that looked more suited for a gala than a graveyard, was Savannah Sterling. They had the audacity to show up at the funeral of the man they had practically murdered, pretending to offer condolences to the tech community. As they walked past the modest gathering, Savannah let out a soft, mocking sigh. She leaned into Victor and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "It is a shame," she murmured, her voice dripping with venomous pity. "But this industry is ruthless. The obsolete and the weak simply cannot survive the new era." A few attendees gasped in horror. Victor smirked, a subtle, arrogant curve of his lips. He finally noticed me standing by a large oak tree. His eyes widened slightly in shock. He expected to see a broken, weeping woman begging for his financial support. Instead, I walked deliberately toward him. My cane struck the wet gravel with a steady, rhythmic thud. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not raise my hand to strike the woman who had crushed my car and stolen my husband. Violence would have been far too cheap. I stopped inches away from Victor. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a certified legal document. It was a binding asset relinquishment form, notarized and filed with the state, proving legally that I had walked away from his vast empire with absolutely $0 and 0 cents. I slammed the heavy paper flat against his chest. He reflexively grabbed it, his confident facade slipping into genuine confusion. I leaned in close, bringing my lips right next to his ear, and whispered with a voice so cold it rivaled the winter wind. "You like managing crises, right? Get ready, because the biggest crisis of your life is about to begin." I pulled back and stared directly into his eyes, watching a brief flicker of uncertainty cross his face. Then, I turned my back on him and Savannah, walking away from the gravesite without a second glance. That afternoon, I walked into a mobile store, canceled my phone plan, and crushed the SIM card under my heel. I legally dropped the name Vance and reclaimed my maiden name. I was no longer the obedient wife waiting in a lonely penthouse. I was a cybersecurity architect with a burned past and nothing left to lose. The war had officially started. 4 years passed. The passage of time was not merely a healer, it was a ruthless forge that reshaped my entire existence. I was no longer the silent, obedient woman shrinking in the freezing shadows of a Chicago penthouse. I now held the title of Senior Cybersecurity Architect at Vanguard Cybernetics. Vanguard was not just a company, it was a fortress, the most secretive, elite, and absolutely powerful digital defense corporation operating within the United States, in the deeply hidden, underground world of high-stakes corporate data. Industry insiders did not know my real name. They referred to me strictly as the Ghost. I was the phantom they brought in to ruthlessly dismantle and reconstruct the most complex, seemingly impenetrable security networks on the planet. And unlike my previous prison of a marriage, I did not work in fearful isolation. I had Damien Cole. Damien was Vanguard's lead encryption specialist, a man whose analytical mind was as sharp and unyielding as a diamond. He was the exact antithesis of the man I used to call my husband. Damien never dictated my working hours. He never laid down arbitrary, suffocating rules or instructed me to quiet my blazing ambition to serve his ego. Instead, he stood firmly beside me as a true equal. He built flawless firewalls to cover my blind spots during intense cyber operations. ensuring I had the perfect foundation to shine brilliantly on the front lines. We operated as a flawless, synchronized machine built on absolute mutual respect. While I was meticulously building a titanium empire in the digital shadows, Victor was slowly suffocating inside the grand life he had so arrogantly chosen, from what the corporate whispers consistently revealed. Despite his continuous stream of financial wealth, his meticulously curated existence had decayed into a hollow, exhausting shell. Savannah Sterling had aggressively proven herself to be nothing more than a catastrophic liability. Beneath the expensive designer clothes and the relentless, aggressive public relations campaigns, she was an entirely incompetent executive whose reckless, impulsive decisions constantly threatened to sink her stolen empire. Victor had spent the entirety of the last 4 years functioning as a highly paid janitor, desperately sweeping up the endless, toxic messes his new partner created. But some messes were simply too massive to sweep under any rug. The absolute breaking point arrived unexpectedly on a mundane Tuesday morning. Savannah's sprawling tech conglomerate was paralyzed completely by a massive, highly sophisticated ransomware attack. A shadowy collective of elite hackers had silently infiltrated her central servers, seizing total, encrypted control of millions of highly sensitive user profiles. However, the attackers did not merely steal the consumer data. They dug deeper and found the buried, highly classified financial ledgers. They acquired undeniable, concrete proof of massive tax evasion, fraudulent shell companies, and illegal offshore banking accounts. If those encrypted files were leaked to the federal authorities, Savannah's company would face immediate, catastrophic bankruptcy and federal dissolution. Far worse, Victor's prestigious crisis management firm would be federally indicted and dismantled for actively orchestrating and hiding the financial crimes. They were both staring directly down the dark barrel of 20 to 30 years in a federal penitentiary. Absolute panic consumed them. Their in-house engineering team was entirely useless, completely locked out by the malicious code dominating their system. They had exactly 24 hours before the hackers released the financial bombs to the global press. Cornered, terrified, and desperate, Victor utilized every single ounce of his political leverage, burning massive favors and calling in heavy debts just to secure an emergency consultation with Vanguard Cybernetics. It was a universally accepted fact among the global ultra-wealthy that Vanguard was the singular entity on the face of the earth capable of neutralizing a digital threat of this magnitude within a 24-hour window. They flew their private jet directly to our secure, unmarked facility on the East Coast. When they walked into the sleek, expansive lobby of Vanguard, they wore their signature arrogance like heavy armor. They carried themselves with the delusional, irritating superiority of people who genuinely believed their immense wealth could simply purchase their salvation on demand. They were swiftly escorted into the Apex conference room, a stunning architectural masterpiece entirely enclosed in reinforced, soundproof glass that overlooked the ocean. They sat on the plush, imported leather chairs, aggressively tapping their expensive watches, demanding the immediate, undivided attention of Vanguard's top-tier executives. Damien stood quietly in the adjacent, darkened observation room, offering me a knowing, deeply confident nod through the glass. I adjusted the lapels of my impeccably tailored charcoal suit. The heavy, secure door to the conference room unsealed with a soft, authoritative pneumatic hiss. Victor and Savannah did not even bother to look up from their frantic tablets, merely assuming a standard account manager was walking in to grovel for their lucrative business. I walked with steady, echoing footsteps straight to the head of the long, polished mahogany table. I pulled out the heavy chairman's seat, the leather creaking slightly, commanding the silent room, and I confidently sat down. Victor looked up. The thick stack of confidential legal briefs he was holding slipped right through his trembling fingers. The heavy papers hit the polished floor with a loud, chaotic slap that echoed sharply off the glass walls. The arrogant scowl on his face instantly dissolved, replaced by a pale, breathless mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He was staring directly at the woman he had completely discarded, now sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the corporate food chain. Savannah shifted in her seat, her eyes darting frantically from Victor to me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The supposedly obsolete, weak woman she had mocked at a graveyard was now holding a razor blade directly against the jugular of her entire empire. "Julia!" Victor gasped, his voice cracking. Completely abandoning his polished professional composure, he leaned forward, attempting to summon the authoritative, commanding tone he used to control me during our marriage. "Julia, we need to talk in private. Right now, just the two of us. We have history." I leaned back in the heavy leather chair and folded my hands neatly on the mahogany table. I did not blink. I did not offer a single shred of warmth or familiarity. "There is no one named Julia available to you in this building," I replied, my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of any emotion. "You will address me as Director Hunt. Furthermore, our premium crisis consultation fee is exactly $15,000 per minute. You have already wasted 4 minutes staring at me in silence. I suggest you take your seat and open your files, unless you prefer to continue bleeding capital." Victor swallowed hard, his face flushing crimson with a humiliating mixture of rage and absolute powerlessness. He slowly sank back into his chair. At that exact moment, the heavy door hissed open again. Damien strolled in, holding a sleek tablet and a steaming ceramic mug. He walked directly to my side and placed the mug precisely by my right hand. It was a dark roast Ethiopian blend with a dash of cinnamon, steeped at the exact temperature I preferred during intense operations. I did not even have to ask. Damien simply knew. He took the seat next to mine, his eyes scanning the room with calm, calculated authority. Victor watched this silent, flawless exchange. I could see the muscles in his jaw ticking furiously. The realization was slowly choking him. In 5 entire years of marriage, Victor Vance never once knew how I took my coffee. He never noticed my habits, my preferences, or my silent cues. Yet the man sitting beside me understood my exact needs without a single word spoken. The suffocating jealousy radiating from Victor was almost tangible, burning through his expensive tailored suit. "Let us examine the architecture of your monumental failure," I stated, tapping the command screen embedded in the table. The massive frosted glass wall behind me instantly transitioned into a high-definition tactical display, illuminating the dark room with cascading lines of encrypted data. Savannah immediately went on the defensive, her shrill voice breaking the heavy tension. "This is a targeted, unprovoked attack from an elite foreign syndicate," she insisted, waving her manicured hands wildly. "My junior engineering team was negligent. I explicitly told them to reinforce the outer firewalls last month. They left us completely vulnerable. You need to trace the external IP addresses and neutralize them immediately." I looked at her. I allowed a long, suffocating silence to fill the room, letting her pathetic lies hang in the cold air. "Your junior engineers did exactly what they were paid to do," I said softly, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. "The outer firewalls are absolutely flawless. The encryption keys are perfectly intact. There is no external breach. Ms. Sterling." With 3 rapid keystrokes, I executed a deep dive diagnostic protocol. The massive screen behind me shifted violently. The cascading green code vanished, replaced by a highly classified, heavily encrypted digital transaction log. I magnified a specific string of data so large that neither Victor nor Savannah could possibly look away. "You were not hacked," I announced, my voice slicing through the room like a surgical scalpel. The malicious code was planted from the inside. Specifically, it was deployed through a hidden backdoor embedded deep within your core administrative server, a backdoor that was manually created by a user with supreme executive clearance. I tapped one final key. A high-resolution image of a digital signature flashed on the screen, alongside a massive, untraceable offshore cryptocurrency transfer totaling exactly $25 million. "You sold the back door." "Savannah," I stated, locking my eyes onto her terrified face. "You secretly sold a direct access point to your biggest competitor, hoping to personally pocket a massive bribe while artificially driving down your own stock price so you could buy it back for pennies. It was a brilliant, greedy little scheme, but the people you sold it to betrayed you. They realized that instead of just peeking at your algorithms, they could seize your entire network and hold it hostage for $1 billion. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the deafening sound of a carefully constructed reality completely imploding. Victor slowly turned his head to look at Savannah. The color had entirely drained from his face. He was a master of managing crises, but he had spent the last 4 years fiercely protecting a woman who was actively sabotaging her own company. More importantly, the terrifying legal implications crashed into him. By legally shielding her company and aggressively hiding these financial anomalies from the federal government, Victor had unknowingly crossed the line from a sleazy defense attorney to a primary co-conspirator in a massive federal extortion and wire fraud syndicate. Savannah began to hyperventilate, covering her face with her trembling hands, unable to utter a single word of defense. Victor abruptly stood up, his heavy chair scraping violently against the floor. The arrogant, untouchable crisis manager was completely gone. He looked like a drowning man staring at a rescue boat that was actively sailing away. He slammed his hands onto the mahogany table, leaning toward me with wide, desperate eyes. "Director Hunt," Victor pleaded, his voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated terror. "You cannot report this. If this data leaves this room, the federal government will seize everything. My firm, my licenses, my freedom. I will lose it all. We will pay you whatever you want. Double your premium rate. $50 million, $100 million. Just patch the system, erase the transaction logs, and keep this a complete secret, please." Victor's face hardened, shifting from sheer terror to a desperate, venomous anger. "You listen to me," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "If you leak a single byte of this data, I will personally destroy this firm. I will tie Vanguard Cybernetics up in so many federal lawsuits that you will never see the light of day. Client confidentiality is absolute. You are legally bound to protect us." I did not flinch. Instead, a slow, highly dangerous smile spread across my face. I reached into the sleek leather folder resting on the table and pulled out a crisp, pristine document. It was the standard emergency consultation agreement Victor had blindly signed exactly 10 minutes ago in the lobby, far too panicked to actually read the fine print. I slid the heavy paper across the mahogany table until it rested directly under his nose. "You should have read Clause Section 4, Paragraph 2. Victor," I said, my voice dripping with icy satisfaction. "It clearly states that if Vanguard Cybernetics uncovers undeniable evidence of active, ongoing felony crimes committed by the client, we possess the absolute right and the legal obligation to immediately notify the Federal Bureau of Investigation to protect our own liability." Victor stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was his own handwriting. He had legally authorized his own execution. "Furthermore," I continued, glancing over at Damien, who was already calmly closing his tablet, "my lead encryption specialist initiated that precise protocol exactly 5 minutes ago." As if on cue, the heavy glass doors of the Apex conference room vibrated slightly. Down below, in the expansive marble lobby, the distinct, flashing red and blue lights of federal tactical vehicles reflected fiercely through the reinforced windows. Dozens of agents wearing dark windbreakers were actively swarming the reception desk. Savannah let out a blood-curdling scream. The reality of a federal prison sentence completely shattered her fragile, arrogant mind. She spun around and violently slapped Victor across the face, the sharp crack echoing loudly in the silent room. "You were supposed to protect me," she shrieked, her voice completely hysterical. "You promised you could fix anything." Victor did not even register the physical blow. He stood completely paralyzed as Savannah collapsed onto the polished floor, weeping pathetically as the heavy footsteps of federal agents echoed down the main corridor. She had instantly lost her company, her wealth, and her freedom. Victor's entire empire, His flawless reputation as the ultimate crisis manager was being completely crushed because he had become the very architect of his own monumental crisis. Suddenly, Victor dropped heavily to his knees. The untouchable executive was entirely broken. He crawled toward me, desperately grabbing my hand with his sweaty palms. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his pale face. "I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I never signed the divorce papers. I kept them on my desk for 4 entire years, waiting for you to come home. I still love you. We can fix this. Please, just tell them you made a mistake." I looked down at the man I had once worshipped. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just a cold, hollow pity. I violently ripped my hand out of his desperate grip. I unclasped the sleek smartwatch from my left wrist and placed it flat on the glass table. I tapped the face once. A holographic projection flared to life in the dim room. It was a crystal clear, high-definition video feed taken from the dashcam of a commercial truck traveling directly behind us on that freezing night 4 years ago. The footage clearly showed the violent impact. It showed Savannah stepping out without a scratch. And then, it showed Victor arriving. It captured the exact, unforgiving moment he wrapped his warm coat around a stranger, completely ignoring my mangled, bleeding body trapped inside my ruined car just 10 yards away. "You do not love anyone, Victor," I whispered, my voice echoing with quiet, absolute finality. "You only love the intoxicating feeling of being a savior to those who blindly submit to you, but I am no longer a submissive." I turned my back on him and walked toward the heavy glass doors. I did not look back as the federal agents stormed into the room, their loud voices demanding everyone get on the ground. I stepped out into the quiet, serene hallway, leaving Victor to completely collapse into the dark, inescapable abyss he had created. Damien was leaning casually against the hallway wall, a warm, genuine smile lighting up his face. As the cold air conditioning of the facility hit my shoulders, he stepped forward and gently draped his heavy, luxurious wool coat over me. He did not say a single word. He simply offered his arm. I took it. Walking down the long corridor with my head held high, I was completely free, fiercely proud, and holding the absolute reins of my own destiny. The best, most satisfying revenge is never dirtying your own hands. It is simply stepping aside and watching your enemies fall violently into the exact pit they spent years digging for you. Hello again, and thank you so sincerely for listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, YouTube has completely cut off our funding, meaning we absolutely cannot upload new videos here for the foreseeable future. If you found today's journey empowering and want to hear more, please help us survive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you can listen to our absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that are far too intense to ever be made public on YouTube. You can simply scan the Patreon QR code right now on your screen, or click the link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you for your endless support, and never let anyone silence your truth.